Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This show is commercial free because listeners buy me a $5 virtual coffee at buymeacoffee.com/heychaplain. You don't even have to do that. You already get the show for free. But thank you. It really does mean the world to me. This podcast exists so that cops can hear encouragement from other cops. You might not talk directly to a police chaplain, but I'm hoping that you might listen to a chaplain talk to other cops about being a wiser, healthier person. On this podcast, you'll hear from detectives and dispatchers, U.S. Marshals, and county sheriffs, as well as the occasional patrol officer from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are giving you the wisdom gleaned from their experience so that you don't have to learn the hard way. How do you get the bad guy to offer up a confession? It may be part science, but it's also largely an art, managing not only the psychology of the suspect, but also your own emotions like pride and anger, disgust, and impatience. For most officers, it helps to have someone dialed in who can mentor you and help you to find that balance that produces results. So today I'm talking to Mike Baldwin. Mike was a cop from Maricopa County, Arizona for over 20 years. In the department where he served, he went from patrol officer to field training officer to patrol sergeant, and it seemed like he would continue to climb the promotional ladder until suddenly he hit the brick wall of departmental politics. That's incredibly frustrating and feels pretty unfair most of the time. Some higher up pours a bucket of cold water on your career prospects, and more often than not, they don't even give it a second thought. Meanwhile, your career has been devastated. At this point, a lot of cops quit, transfer, or become bitter, hollowed-out shells of their former selves. But Mike recreated himself by taking a demotion and starting over as a detective in the same department. There, he eventually became a training officer and worked investigations on a DEA task force. It's actually the DEA task force stuff that had me interested in Mike's story when I first met him. But after re-listening and editing my conversation with him, I've decided to leave the task force stuff on the cutting room floor and focus instead on his transition to detective and specifically the skill he developed in talking to suspects and convincing them to give a confession. That turned out to be way more interesting and a more compelling part of his story. And I can always come back to the DEA stuff at a later time. Here's Mike Baldwin. Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Hey, Jared. I'm doing good. How are you?
Excellent. Mike, let's talk about the investigation stuff for a moment. Did you always desire to be a detective?
No, that wasn't my original goal, per se. I thought I would be a patrol sergeant, then move up in rank, become a patrol lieutenant, probably a commander, have my own division, that type of deal. But
Sure.
Things happen at the police department. Politics happen at the police department. So I had to pivot. And bottom line is, whatever I do, whatever role I'm in, whether that was an officer, a field training officer, sergeant, detective, I wanted to be the best. I didn't want to be average. I didn't want to be status quo. I wanted to be in a position where people could count on me. So as a detective, I learned as much as I could, and ultimately I ended my career as a trainer. I trained a lot of guys.
At first, did it feel like a kind of a defeat?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was a patrol sergeant, and some things happened politically in our department, and I realized I was done in that field. I wasn't advancing anymore. And so initially, after you get over the initial hurt and feeling like, hey, I was shunned or something bad happened to me,
Right.
That's part of resilience. It's getting knocked down and getting back up. And I played sports my whole life. I coached high school sports before I became a police officer. I tell people that I have a degree in losing. I lost more games probably than I won in my career, but...
And that does form character, doesn't it?
It forms character. It reveals character.
Yes.
Sports will bring out a lot of things that in you, anger, drive, quit, commitment. I've seen it go a number of different ways with guys.
Can I ask, when you were at that transition point, you're a patrol sergeant, the path forward isn't there anymore. Why did you not switch departments? Why did you not just go somewhere where you could have a clean slate? Did you feel too invested? Were you too... I've seen people mid-career jump departments, even if it meant starting over.
You got to be careful sometimes when you're getting advice from your coworkers. They could see the politics of the police department. They could see that I was being wronged, and it was overt. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick this out. And instead of running and hiding and starting over somewhere, I'm going to stick this out. And I had faith. I believed in God. I believed that he would fix it, right or wrong, and restore me to my position. That never happened. So the script that I had played out in my head, that didn't happen, but that's okay. Because what I did do is make lemonade with lemons.
In my department here in Kansas City, the detectives are the rank of sergeant. And so they get promoted and get a different colored badge when they become detectives. And so a patrol sergeant and detective are technically at the same rank. And so you went down a rank?
Yes.
So when you made the choice to go over to detective, what were you losing?
In our department at the time, a detective was basically a lateral position. You got that position based on training and experience, but you didn't get more pay. And
lateral to a patrol officer.
Yeah, so it was a demotion from supervisor rank or pay. So it was a little bit humbling at first, but I got over that really quick and just started diving into my casework the best I could.
Was there a promotion path to be a supervisor within the investigative bureau?
Yes, you could eventually promote to sergeant or lieutenant. Once you promoted from investigations, then you had to go back out to the road first before you could come back into investigations. So you would promote and then you'd go back to the road. So some guys didn't want to do that. They've already been there, done that.
You eventually got to the point of training. Was that a promotion or any pay increase, or was that just more responsibility?
No, just more responsibility. It was ironic because they paid our field training officers that were on patrol. They got more money to train, but as a detective, they were taking my training and experience and getting it for free. But I enjoyed doing it to a guy who was hungry and willing to learn. The handful of guys that I was able to train and mentor, I thoroughly enjoyed that.
As you went through that second part of your career in investigations, you developed an ability to talk to suspects and to get them to talk. Tell me a little bit about that and what was different about your approach.
I do believe that this was one of my strengths. I was a little older when I went into the police department. I had some life experience. I was married. I had coached and taught in high school. I knew how to talk to people a little bit better. Some officers in the audience can relate to this. When they interview a suspect, sometimes they're mad at him. They're angry at the suspect. They run into the interview room, or sometimes it's out on the side of the road where they're conducting their investigation and they read Miranda rights. And you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Well, most guys would clam up at that point and say nothing. I learned this over time. I need to get not only the arrest, but I got to get a confession to get a conviction and that type of deal. And so the interview started for me as soon as I contacted the person. Initially, when a person is contacted by police and an arrest takes place, sometimes it's not a good situation. Sometimes it's violent. You're resisting me. I'm trying to take you into custody. There's words exchanged. You don't like how you're being treated. But as soon as the cuffs are on, then that part is over. I immediately transition into the interview phase, making sure you are comfortable. I said, hey, you're safe. I'm safe. I would kind of humble myself and tell the bad guy, hey, we came at you hard like that because, man, we heard about your reputation and what a tough guy you were. And forgive all that because now I can see that you're not that type of person. You're a guy just like me. And so I'm going to make you comfortable. Do you need anything to drink? Maybe you need a cigarette. I learned that guys would calm down and talk if they had a cigarette and think that you're cool. Then I said, look, I don't want to talk to you out here on the street in front of all your family and friends. And if you're in a gang, your peers, I want to talk to you at the police department away from everybody so they don't hear, your business. And so I treated them with respect, not all the time, but quite often and more than most. I did get the perp to talk and confess, and I got out of him what I needed to go on with the case.
What are some officers failing to, and especially some detectives failing to do that gets somebody to open up that you were having success with?
Yes, so that's a good question. I think it was immediate de-escalation of the situation. Stop pouring gasoline on the situation. This guy's agitated. Stop trying to compete with him, yell at him, argue with him. That wasn't the time or the place. Humble yourself. You've already won. He's in custody. Now let's treat him like a human being because he is. Yeah, he made a mistake. You have a job to do. Let's be a professional and treat him like not a co-equal, but yeah, with enough dignity and respect that he deserves.
Would you describe your demeanor as more friendly or as more dispassionate? Are you neutral? Or are you engaged?
I would say it's somewhat friendly because I would say that, hey, I want to hear your story, and but I'm not going to do it right now. We're going to do it at the interview at the interview room because that's where I have all of my notes and I have my case file and stuff like that. Even though I could have interviewed him out on the scene, I know the case inside and out. That's why I'm there. But I would kind of dumb it down and switch it to my turf, but it would also give him a time to cool down. And then I would have another patrol officer usually take the suspect back to the police department in the patrol car. And I would tell the officer loud enough in front of the bad guy, I'd be like, hey, make sure the air conditioning's on so he can cool down. And if he needs anything, make sure he gets it. So the bad guy hears that and he's like, oh, this Detective Baldwin guy, he's pretty squared away. He actually cares about me. Yeah, it was part of a game, but it worked. It was a strategy, and I saw it done wrong so many times. I saw detectives argue and yell at people and embarrass them in front of their family and kids and call them, hey, you're a dirtbag. I'm going to throw you in prison and you're never getting out. And that wasn't true. He didn't commit a homicide, so he is getting out. And so I didn't choose to do that. And then I would often go up to the family, maybe the spouse or the girlfriend or whoever was there. I would introduce myself because they were all upset. Mm-hmm. And I would say, look, once we get down to the police department, I talked to your boyfriend or your husband about this matter. I will let him give you a phone call and he can fill you in on what's going on. Wow. That's what they wanted to know anyway, what's going on. Right. And so they thought that was good, and I kept my word. So after we interviewed, I would let the bad guy call his wife or his girlfriend, and I told him, hey, they want to make sure you're okay. I told him that you were going to get the call, and they thought that was cool because most officers didn't offer that.
Well, you see, it sounds like you're describing that you're playing good cop. You are being courteous and conscientious to everybody, the suspect, the suspect's family, the suspect's peers. You are being very, high, trait conscientiousness, toward everyone. Is there a bad cop component to it, or did that not exist?
Yeah, so it wasn't always like you see on TV. Hey, you play the bad cop, good cop. Right. I could do both, and not everybody responded to this kindness and this courtesy. Okay. Some people wanted to stay at that bad guy level, and so it's like, okay, that's how we're going to be. But those interviews didn't usually generate a whole lot. I just had to go on the facts of the case, book him, and basically, throw the book at him. So what I did, say I was talking to you and you were the bad guy, I would say, hey, Jared, look, I don't even know if I have the right guy. I think I do. Let's talk about it. I would get some of the facts out there. I would learn about you. Let's say that you are a drug user and you're committing burglaries. I would kind of rationalize it, and I would say, like, okay, I knew about this other guy that I dealt with. He did over 100 burglaries. And when I had him in custody, he could care less. He showed no remorse. He said, hey, the rich people have too much stuff, and that's why I took it. And I said, you know what? I got no time for that, breaking into people's houses and so forth. I said, you're a drug user. How long have you been using drugs then? Oh, I've been using drugs for 5 years. I see that you're a father and you have kids at home. Were you trying to steal things, so you could provide for them? Yeah, I was trying to get them some stuff. I would sell the product and get some money so I could give to my kids. And then I would say, yeah, so you probably weren't like this guy that did 100 burglaries. You probably did, 10, 12? Really kind of minimize it. And usually he'd go, no, not that many. I only like 8. Oh, okay, well, all right. Now that we talked about the 8, let's talk about them. And quite often, I only knew about 1 or 2 burglaries.
Right. He's actually giving you information.
He would give me information on 3 or 4 others. And then I would say, what do you think about that victim? Would you like it if somebody came to your house and in the middle of the night or whenever broke in and stole from you and stole things from your children and your wife? No, I wouldn't like it. I go, how would you feel? Oh, I'd be pissed off and stuff. And yeah, me too. My victims here, they're very scared. They think that you're going to come back and break into their house again. I'm pretty sure this was a one-time deal, right? Oh, yeah, just a one-time deal. Would you be willing to write them something? Letting them know that you weren't looking to hurt them. You were just looking to steal things for your drug habit or whatever. I can't tell you what to write, but just something to alleviate their fears. And that was the hook. And I'm telling you, Jared, most guys took a pen and paper and wrote a confession. It was weak. It was generic. And they would say, dear whoever, because they didn't know who the victim was.
Right.
Please forgive me for breaking into your house. I'm really not a bad guy. If you could ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I was just in a bad way and I was looking for some money to give to my kids. Please forgive me. Yeah. Great. That's a confession. So now I have a audio video recording. I have a written confession, which I would share with the victim, and I would write that confession out in the body of my report and give it to the prosecutor. Yeah. So it worked. And I had other detectives that I trained. Once they used this technique, they would text me, hey, Baldwin, I got a written confession today. That was kind of like my MO, my modus operandi.
Right. So now you mentioned earlier that you'd seen it done wrong several times. What are some of the common mistakes? Like you're training up a new detective. What kind of mistakes are they making? What are they? Are they assuming stuff from watching too many movies, or is it more just they're playing off their gut and they haven't had enough experience yet? I mean, what are they doing wrong?
So anytime I trained a new guy, we got someone in custody, I said, do you want to interview the guy or do you want me to do it? And most of the time, they wanted to prove to me that they could do it. So they said, no, I'll interview him. I'm not scared. And they would go in and get nothing.
Uh-huh.
And then I would come around and do what I just told you I would do and get a confession. And they're like, this is unbelievable. And I said, so we use it as a teaching moment. So they walked into the interview room and they kept the guy still cuffed up. He wanted something to eat or drink. And they're like, no, not during the interview. They wanted to ask a few other questions. Can I make a phone call? Basically, no, not until I get what I need. They immediately went in and took out their Miranda card and started reading off the Miranda card. And it's like, look, I always Mirandized the people before I interviewed them, but I didn't just start off initially Mirandizing them. I would talk, hey, Jared, how are you? What do you do for work? How long have you been doing that? Do you like it? Yeah. Are you employed now? No, I'm not employed. And I know why, because he's a drug addict. And I would talk about kids and, oh yeah, I have 3 kids. Are you with them now? No. Child Protective Service has them, but I didn't say, because you're a loser father. I would say, well, you need to get on the right track so you can be with your kids. Do you love them? Oh yeah, I love them. I would treat him like a human being. What you said earlier, empathy.
Yeah.
I empathized with him, and I didn't always start my career that way. I learned that as I was going along, and then it became how I did things and how I talked to people. And I was offended when I didn't get a confession out of somebody, because it happened high 80-90% of the time that I did get somebody to spill the beans on their case, and sometimes tell me even more than what I knew.
So that rookie cop comes in and he's not empathetic. He's maybe too clinical. He's maybe not prepared enough to feel comfortable with things like Mirandizing the suspect. What else are they getting wrong? Where are they getting tripped up where they don't get that confession?
So the tone, a lot of times, I expect the bad guy to lie to me.
Uh-huh.
And so the first time the bad guy lies about something, they would catch him and say, "You're lying. If you continue to lie to me, I'm going to take you to prison." I could care less about a lie. I just put that in the back of my head while I'm still interviewing, and let him tell 3 or 4 or 5 lies. It's okay. I expect to get lied to. And guess what? If the roles were reversed and I was sitting in his spot, I would probably lie too. Little children, we don't teach them to lie. I mean, from day one, they want to point the finger at somebody else or say it wasn't me or it fell on its own. They don't want to admit, yes, mom and dad, I'm the one that disobeyed you and I broke this item. Well, the bad guy does the same thing. And so I let him lie, and then I would start bringing out the evidence. I go, yeah, I know you mentioned that. I know that not to be true because of this, this, and this. And so I tell you what, let's start all over again. And let's tell the truth this time. And so we'd start all over with the interview. Once I called them on it.
You're not offended. You're not taking it personally.
Not taking it personally.
You expected them to do it. Right.
And so that was the other thing, too. To have this empathetic type of interview, I had to be prepared to give up myself, my time, because I was going to be in there for an hour listening to all the stories. Most guys, the second the guy started to lie, they're like, you know what? If you're going to lie, I'm done. And the interview's over. They'd be out of an interview room within 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I'd be in an interview room for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half.
Do you think that some young detectives detest the suspect too much?
Yeah, because the suspect stinks a lot of times. He's a drug user. You want to get as far away from him as possible. Instead, I actually got closer to him. I sat closer than you should, letting him talk, letting him tell his stories. I sat in interviews, Jared, with guys who were child rapists.
Yeah.
I was in interviews with homicide suspects, guys that killed innocent women. I was in an interview with a woman who killed her 2-year-old son. And I have to maintain my composure, my bearing, and I am working for justice for all. I am working for the victim at that point. If I lose my cool, and I would tell this to your audience and any officer out there, if you lose your cool, that's the only thing that we can control is our response. If I lose my cool, you didn't take it from me. I gave it away. I can't get it back. I'm sweating inside. I'm mad. My blood is boiling at times. I remember sitting with a child rapist and asking him to go into the details of his crime. And I could feel the blood boiling within me. But I had a job to do, and it was for that victim.
You kept that hidden.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then maybe when we're all done and I have what I need and so forth, a couple times I told people what I thought of them. And in this particular case, I told this man what I thought of him.
But you did that after you had everything you needed from him.
Absolutely.
Right.
And because I didn't want him to clam up and not say anything. Sometimes you need that evidence, along with a confession and a recorded confession and maybe a written confession. Yes, it was me. I did it.
Mike, that was fantastic. Thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
No, I enjoyed you having me, and I appreciate what you do to help men and women in uniform. And I would tell them that the chaplain quite often is an underutilized resource. And if they need somebody to speak to, or if they're going through a difficult time, to reach out to their chaplain if they have one at their department, and just share some of the things that are on their heart, I think it would be very beneficial to their overall well-being.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. As I mentioned before, this conversation comes from a much larger conversation. And I focus primarily on this skill that Mike had in drawing a confession out of suspects. And I think it's fantastic that Mike was able to take a second run at his career, develop an expertise, and create a niche for himself as the detective who could get that confession maybe when nobody else could. But in a different part of the larger conversation, I came back to ask him about that difficult experience that led him there in the first place. How do you resolve bitterness when admins and supervisors and other people have interfered with your career path, with your promotions, with your advancement? That's sometimes irreversible. Sometimes there's no coming back from that. And so how do you deal with resentment and bitterness? How do you become a resilient police officer after you've been wronged by your fellow cops?
It's a good question, Jared, and I would say that I didn't always respond properly the way that I should have, because I did become bitter and angry. And when I would see this supervisor who had wronged me, I would want to walk the opposite way in the hallway. Yeah. At the same time, because I didn't want to be anywhere near some of these people, I spent most of my time outside on the streets and not in my cubicle. And when I was outside on the street, that's where I was able to talk to bad guys, learn from them, and get even better at my craft. I went to church, and one night I had heard a sermon where the pastor preached about bitterness. He talked about if you're bitter towards somebody, it's like you drinking the poison and waiting for them to die.
Yeah. Yep.
And that really struck me because that was true. That's what was happening in my life. These supervisors, they've moved on. Some of them have been even promoted further, which is a total shock to me.
That's always the way it happens.
They got more money. They were going to get more money in retirement. They didn't think anything about me. And so I had to basically forgive them without them ever asking for forgiveness. Yeah. And I had to move on. And that was the only way for me to get past being bitter.
I want to thank Mike for his honesty and transparency. I believe that a lot of officers have gone through this same kind of thing, and it helps to hear Mike's story of not only surviving it, but actually enjoying parts of his career and developing new skills. You need to know that just because someone has frustrated your plans, it doesn't mean that a law enforcement career has been lost on you. Most of the time, when a door is closed, another door often opens up in a place where you may have least expected it. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain, we talk to one of many American cops who immigrated from war-torn countries.
So a lot of times, people would know if one army would come in and take over the town, and people were getting killed inside their homes. For example, if your next door neighbor, like sometimes people would wake up and the whole family was dead, you knew that you might be the next home because, for example, whichever religion at that time was taking over that town, if you were not that religion or that army, you better move because you don't know if you would be next. So my parents were split. We were living with my mother, my sister and I, and then my dad was on the other side of the country. We did not have any contact for at least 3 or 4 years. The phone lines were cut. We had no way to be together. After the war ended, certain cities were created. They were called like the mutual cities, where families could come in together and meet. So after 3 or 4 years, let's say my dad, we met, and my dad and my mom talked about reuniting together as a family. And one of the options was United States. United States was taking families from this Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian war in order to unite the families that were split up.
If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain. And as always, pray for peace in our city.